Hey everybody, it's been a second. I just wanted to give a video life update, kind of let y'all know what's been going on. A lot of scary stuff has been happening in the past few years, and so it's been why I haven't really been able to update as much as I'd like to, but you know how it goes. Um, I mean, I'm not sure what there is to really say, I guess. Um, I hope y'all are doing well. Um, I hope everything's okay. Give me 1 second. This much I'm certain of. It doesn't happen immediately. You'll finish and it'll be that. Until a moment will come. Maybe in a month, maybe a year. You'll be sick or feeling troubled or deeply in love or quietly uncertain and content for the first time in your life. It won't matter. Out of the blue, beyond any cause you can trace, suddenly realize things are not how you perceive them to be at all. For some reason, you'll no longer be the person you believed you once were. You'll detect slow and subtle shifts going on all around you. More importantly, shifts in you. Worse, you'll realize it's always been shifting, like a shimmer of sorts. A vast shimmer, only dark like a room. But you won't understand why or how. You'll have forgotten what granted you this awareness in the first place. Old shelters, television, magazines, movies won't protect you anymore. You might try scribbling in a journal, on a napkin maybe in the margins between the texts. That's when you'll discover you no longer trust the very walls you took for granted. Even the hallways you walked 100 times will feel longer, much longer. And the shadows, any shadow at all, will suddenly seem deeper. Much, much deeper. You might try then, as I did, to find a sky so full of stars. It will blind you again. Only no sky can blind you now. Even with all that iridescent magic up there, your eye will no longer linger on the light. It will no longer trace constellations. You'll care only about the darkness, and you'll watch it for hours, for days, maybe even for years, trying in vain to believe you're just some kind of indispensable universe-appointed sentinel, as if just by looking you could actually keep it at bay. It will get so bad you'll be afraid to look away. You'll be afraid to sleep. Then, no matter where you are, in a crowded restaurant or some desolate street, or even in your very home, you'll dismantle every assurance you've ever lived by. You'll stand aside as a great complexity intrudes, tearing apart piece by piece all of your carefully conceived denials, whether deliberate or unconscious. And then, for better or worse, you'll turn, unable to resist. Resist you still will, fighting with everything you've got not to face the thing you most dread, what is now, what will be, what has always come before. Creature you truly are, the creature we all are, buried in the nameless black of a name. And then the nightmares will begin. Johnny Truant, October 31st, 1998, Hollywood, California. I get it, but like, That's the thing, right? The whole idea, although however farcical it is, it's I feel like it's way more interesting if you took it to be this non-linear space, to be this thing at a point in time. Look, I know, I get it. It's hard. I'm not thinking too much on it. I'm not. Look, I. Why add such linearity to it though? Like, you should be able. Can I just start from the start? In 2019, I picked up Source again, inspired by the Beginner's Guide, Stanley Parable, Dear Esther, and many other walking simulators. The term, which was originally a derisive one, meant to complain at the lack of guns or conventional interaction. Time has since passed, and the term has grown to become adopted and cherished as a genre. 2019 was also when the first Backrooms image was posted. I typically stay away from the corners of the internet, such as 4chan and the like. But the post made waves in a fundamental way. Something about the dinginess? Or was it the uncanny feeling that came from the seemingly commercial architecture? As best as many tried early on to answer that question genuinely and earnestly, the panoptic beast of the internet's many algorithms did what it does best. And over time, the conversation shifted. Liminal space as we know it today is a far cry from the original evocative feeling that many felt about that image. The internet, specifically the strange cannibalistic sector that is endlessly recreating content in an Ouroboros of trending terms and topics, retread not out of curiosity or creation, but exploiting keywords and getting that good search engine optimization. The mascot horror period of the internet is still strong. However, liminality does not belong in the same category. That's not to say the community is a monolith. Many attempts at proposing an answer have been done, and many are curiosities and can provide something to appreciate. However, most of these conversations miss the mark hard. Let me elaborate.
Hey, what's up, everybody? These are you guys, and today we're in the Backrooms, right back at it. And today we're gonna find out what's behind this door. Just wanted to remind y'all, this video is sponsored by Audiobox, the only place where you can buy music delivered right to your door.
To put it simply, you don't understand liminal space. Close your eyes, if you would, and picture a room. Any room, whether it be real or fake. Do you know how the texture of the wall feels? Is it a popcorn texture with miniature crevasses and bumps? A smooth surface with subtle seams that gradually meet with another part of the wall. Whatever your answer is, it's based on many factors. Sensorial memory, the past experiences that you've accumulated over your lifetime. That information can be accessed and used to put together a simulacrum in your mind. Second, in this room you created, how accurate are the details? Is it a one-to-one recreation down to the way the room smells, the temperature, the humidity, the soft fluorescent buzz? Your memory doesn't just store sensory information, but the specific placement and organization of all the little nuances, miscellaneous furniture at the time, and disposables. And then this unspoken, ungrasped thing, the strange evocative feelings you can grasp in many games that try to mimic light, how light bounces and clings to surfaces. When we define things in a culture, no matter how virtual or niche, we have a tendency to accept and run with the currently established lore. Something that becomes a offshoot, a small idea snowballs and gets widely accepted and culturally appreciated, being embedded and adopted as the zeitgeist. I love narrative and lore. It's a good way to contextualize a player's actions and games, but it can be more than just script or dialogue. Environmental as well. Learning level design or architecture can illuminate a person to see things more than their whole. If you're still with me at this point, I'll be direct and concise with my goals for this video. I want to deconstruct what has been currently established and tear away at what has been placed. Next spot chases, shadow monsters, levels, jump scares, hazmen, evil dimensional portal corporations. The fucking Hat Man. No disrespect to those things. All those described are well and good artistically, but all that is set dressing. We've mistaken the forest for the trees and played a creative internet game of telephone. Yet through each iteration, we've lost more and more fidelity and resolution on the central beating core of liminality. When we look at photos of liminal space, we can see a few repeating factors. Fuzzy grain, no people, static, distortion, noise, low fidelity technology capturing the seeming unease. There's also an aspect of nostalgia people can appreciate. Many people growing up from the late 90s, early 2000s, and onwards are having their earlier experiences recontextualized through the place of time to see what was once a place of shelter, joy, and comfort, now becoming a ghost of itself. A tarnishing memory of what once was. However, that's not all. While we were forming these memories, unbeknownst to many children, an economic crisis was happening right before us. The collapse of the housing market created not only a financial crisis, but added on to the degrading state of the US. This isn't exclusive to America, as capitalism is a globalized thing. However, as things began to deteriorate more and more, the things that we didn't understand, the things happening before us, the media we consumed, the radio we listened to, all that was a distraction from the economic crisis that would lead to the current way things are today. Now, many things have happened since and in between that time, but let's back up a little bit. Wow, that was different. Well, this is something different, completely different. That was something that was punching up beyond its weight class. I'll just keep things simple. Basically, people made deals that harmed the general American public, and as capitalism always does, it seeks profit. Human needs, the things that make our lives better, that's not profitable. Now, I could get into the whole thing of the housing crisis and the economic market and the general collapse and the thousands
of debt. Now we owe to just everything in the current wave of alt-right and generally fascistic things that just kind of detach us empathetically from one another.
It's not just about the transitive passing. If that's all it was, well then it's the horror, the innate horror that comes from being in this room that you can't, I don't know, you can't find your way out of. Your brain keeps telling you that, oh, this belongs to a kitchen, this belongs to a bathroom, but none of it, all of it's alien, all of it's ultimately alien, because these are not, we recognize humans, we recognize grass, we recognize the sky. Our brains don't, there's a weird nature in our relationship to these spaces. This essay project video is a hodgepodge of things, many different versions and perspectives of myself. There are several that have been through this, have made this version of this video that don't even exist anymore. And I'm here now, and everything's cool. Everything's fine. Genuinely. To get back to the main plot concept and become more of a, let's just say, comprehensive essay, I'll just run through things real quick. On May 14, 2019, this image was paired with this text to accidentally conjure something that the internet would quickly run with and transform into a fixation all its own. Although I doubt the exact origins given the anonymous nature of 4chan, this stuck with a lot of people, myself included. Although unfortunately, history is made by the loudest, and no one is quite as loud as a snowballing fandom building off this one idea without any sense of proportional nuance or deconstruction for why this art stuck with a lot of people. Media literacy is not doing great, folks. We take a lot of things way too literally. I know most people who are watching this are probably big fans of YouTube Shorts. Maybe fans is the wrong word. Victims, more accurately. You're just going through your subscriptions and then, oh, a short pops up. It looks interesting. It looks like something that you've enjoyed and seen before. You click on it, and then before you know it, you're just scrolling more and more and more. Before you know it, it's already 5, and you've wasted the whole day just zoned out, scrolling on what is essentially short-form garbage content that you didn't absorb nor enjoy. You kind of enjoyed it, enough to keep you going, but is that really enjoyment? Is it? Anyways, the script for this video, which was made in 2018 originally, was about this topic, kind of. But given the current popularity and seemingly dying star that is the overall interest for the Backrooms, the internet, through talented artists and general building on top of the source material, created either 2 categories that I'll be classifying. These are not fully tangible categories, but rather a framework in which I'll be working with. Keep in mind that this is not to be taken as gospel, and it's purely just a framework at organizing content. First, you have the more ethereal of the 2 examples, being vast, vague spaces to wander around. This is closer to the idea of what the original image was trying to evoke, but it's clearly missing something, and hadn't captured and demonstrated the right idea, because we have category 2. Remember those levels? Those big chase levels from Gary's mod? It's just that, but depending on what flavor you want, you got puzzles, vague cryptic scribbles that just evoke piecemeal senses of dread, and kind of threatening, vague narrative implications, but it's mostly just the idea of being watched and stalked by an ever-present figure that you can't see. Primarily what every single person seems to focus on the most. Both of these examples are missing something essential, which is something that I expressed in my earlier essay. What do I mean by evoking something? Well, let's start with the fundamentals. Okay, we have a black void right here. A big, endless black void, infinite in every direction. Now let's add a square. Okay, so far we have a vast emptiness with a square, until we add 3 more. And now, added new dimensional access. We have 3D space. Basic stuff so far, yeah? Okay, so now let's make it a bit bigger, and then put a little dude in there. Now, this could be a lot of things, but we're still not done entirely. What are we missing that we really need to make this a room? We can add soft carpeting, the cush sensation on bare feet with the feeling of an overall softness to cushion this friend as they stand. Let's add some popcorn walls and ceiling. Now we're getting something evocative of a room. We're getting somewhere, yeah? Now we add a light source. This is the part that is criminally under-focused on. Trust me, we'll come back to this later.
Hello?
Take a look at the original photo. A handheld photo of a room taken from outside of it. Yes, this is extremely anal, but tell me, have you ever seen something like this in real life? Most people have said it's kind of how liminal spaces and elegiac rooms have taken off, but much like how Patricia Taxon notices how a lot of comments analyzing Jack Stalber theorize in a very literal, straightforward fashion, I've seen no one talk about what makes them so mesmerized other than the usual, quote, unsettling, trippy, liminal. All of these are terms trying to literalize and cram our perception into adjectives and keywords. This room is deeply yellow, uncomfortably so. The kind of yellow that makes me physically ill when I encounter it in the real world. It's an overstimulation that reminds me of my experiences in the pitfalling anxiety of waiting in a doctor's waiting room for a medical procedure. For some, it could just remind them of an office setting with the space open, just urging someone to set up cubicles. But there are none. There are so many interesting things that could be discussed, but instead, we're just talking about this literally, as if it were some sort of SCP file. A giant, scary, contextual thing that has boundaries and limits. And that feels like it's really not taking the concept as it is. Our vocabulary focuses on the categorization and not subjective memory that each individual person has with these kinds of spaces. The fact that no one really discussed this shows in the later fan games. Although I don't think that it's bad that these games exist, it feels like it's uninterested with the relationship that the viewer has with it. Wow, this has got me really turned around! It sucks in my opinion. Also, don't get me started with the way people fuck this up with levels. It's a disconnected space from reality. You're going to give it levels? At this point, this is just a more watered down version of Slender. In my defense, I'm generalizing over the zeitgeist and overall cultural understanding of liminal space. This is not a diss on any specific fan game or remake of the Backrooms itself. I have no beef with artists. Make what you like. Do what you feel good with. This is just giving a new perspective. Some new tools to work with. This is no longer just your ordinary cowtail brush, but, let's skip this analogy.
Chapter 3.
Here's another exercise. Visualize a place you've been to recently. It can be any time of day or night, whether it's a park or theater or hotel room. What are some consistent elements that you can think of when you're at these places? People, visible sources of light, otherwise you'd just be envisioning a pitch black room, which is still a valid example. I'll get to it, I'm so close! You see what the walls look like, what they feel like? Can you smell what this room's odor is, if it has any? What does the floor feel like? Does it have patterns? Is it carpeted? Where are the doors? Where are the windows? Eventually, depending on whether or not you're fabricating a make-believe space or you're remembering a memory in space, there are limits because the human brain can only process so much sensory information at once. But all of these things are related. Which of these rooms, if any, have you found yourself examining the deep details, getting really close to the texture and degradation of wallpaper, or finding a dust bunny sitting politely in the corner of a faux wood flooring? All of this requires your previous experiences and muscle memory with spaces you've been in before. It's not just the lack of people, it's the limitations of the computer that you use as a tool to think with. Processing power has exceeded in computing compared to the brain, although memory-wise we're still just barely ahead of the game because of the absurd amount of memory we have. Terabytes and terabytes. Given if you aren't dealing with memory issues, processing difficulties, aphantasia, or generally neurodivergent in a way that your relationship with localized space differs from what's in this analysis, you're valid. You aren't broken. You're just not represented. And that's why we make art. We try to show others what we perceive, things that can't be shown by adjective and noun. The closest thing verbally is synecdoche. The sentence, quote, the rotting carcass of a soft drink office space. You're just barely inching closer and closer to an idea that can be shared from one person to another. See Dan Olson's video. You could also probably piece together an overall concept, but I never told you anything specifically. Comparatively, instead of spending 45 minutes telling you each individual detail, I showed you a 3D visualization of the same space that you and I are on, the same level for what I meant. This is a medium that has existed ever since ray tracing was a thing. Even before that in certain examples. This is why I adore 3D space in video games, and why watching video essays of these things infuriates me so much. Like, you're almost there. You've almost grasped your paw on the topic. On the rotting gem. This, and this, and this, and this, and this, and that, and this, and this, and that, and this. Look at this. See this? Oh. Beauty. This is why space on its own is subjective, and vastly different from person to person.
Chapter 4. Source and the
Here I am. I'm in the spot I usually always am. On top of the car. The moon's out tonight. Can I change it? Yeah, okay. And it's a really powerful night tonight. I'm most likely not going to like the sound of my voice, but it usually helps if I'm self-aware about it. But, oh wow, look at that. I have a lot of quarrels with this holiday, but, I think this is usually barely almost the appropriate time for fireworks. But c'est la vie. They're gonna keep busting fireworks all week.
But that we are living in a consistent three-dimensional space with a linear timeline. We are left with the illusion of a static world, even though the existential dread lies within physics itself, which I will not be getting into in this essay, unfortunately. What we'll be covering later will be getting lighter, and then much, much, much darker. Let's get into light real quick, I guess.
Chapter 5. Why did that autistic negative space?
Light, not to get too analytical like we were earlier, is what you use to navigate and see stuff. It can be projected from the sun, from a halogen light, a street lamp, a monitor from your computer. It's a thing that bounces off the photons and bounces off your eyeballs so you can see. Now, for many people, they just look and they take it as it is. They simply look and see, okay, cool, that's a light. But for me, for my specific sensorial grasping of it, it feels so tangible. Tangible in a way that James Turrell has been able to establish in some of his work. So fascinating about it is he too is able to make sort of it's imperceptible and indescribable, but I have two strange symptoms that come with my unique flavor of being neurodivergent. Something I may not be able to fully describe in this essay either. The first is a strange phenomena of attributing the spatial, contextual, and the sensory information into its own unique day and event. I describe it in terms likened to an Instagram filter, a new one every day. A second phenomena is a lot more simple, more unnerving to think about. Perhaps it's from my continued exposure to the internet. Maybe it is a dissociative problem, completely unrelated with anything I've done, given to me before I was born. For the longest time, when I looked at real videos of people, performances, movies, it felt unreal. A visceral feeling that what I was looking at, faces, people, actions, events, None of it was physically cohesive with the real performances, movies. None of it felt physically cohesive with the life I took place in. YouTubers, actors, commercials, all took place inside of this outer world, completely detached but alive on its own terms. Over time it got easier, but through all the past years it's been getting worse. It's been getting worse again. This generative AI threatens to completely abolish the line between reality and unreality. When you think of a face, how well do you know it? The face of a person, the face of a friend. The wrinkles, pores, imperfections, and maladies that lay upon the freckles and speckles of a face. This person does not exist is a website that makes trillions of 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 faces that you could say looks real. But how do you tell when someone is real? How do you know when someone's flaws are true? When they sit from underneath your screen, it's just as real as anything else. Let me get to your tangled root. Let me grab at you. I have tried heedlessly, bloodied and screaming in petrified exhaustion. The wheels continue to grind and coal at my marrow, and as I own only one husk of a person to explain this, liminality and liminal spaces aren't just about passing through hallways and doors. If that were all it was, if that were all of it, we wouldn't have such a fixation. Please listen to me. Liminality is about this world, and about this world becoming less and less real. Please hear me out. I am begging and pleading with someone, anyone to hear me. Terms and descriptors are not sacrosanct, and they shouldn't be held as gospel when they don't tell the full story. I use elegiac, and more specifically hypernormality, hyperreality, because accumulating from all of this madness, we have one continuous verdict, an understanding. These are places that are made from amalgamated scraps and pieces of our collective unconscious. The stuff you pass by and the stuff you walk by, much like a person sitting down on the street quickly threatened and chewed off by cops with their guns. The living world you know and love that breathes and moves and cries gets suffocated and abandoned. These places that people belong in, and without people, these places become just as haunted and skeletal as they were before. The only difference is our humanity, our noise. Our livelihoods drowned out the haunting scars of industry and progress. The tree falling in the woods cannot scream when the office hums and people holding papers, copying, working, running power all day, every day. Those lamps that don't turn off inside your house. The lamps that continue to stay on throughout day and night, no one around. The towers that use more and more water every day. The things we consume and eat and throw away without noticing the beauty of it all. We become victims of a greater threat, living on autopilot, becoming liminal in ourselves as we're replaced with cheaper plastic men and cheaper plastic ideas. Video essays become the same. Delivery, edit, becoming the same. Media becomes content, and content becomes the message. The message becomes another thing that gets left behind in a giant mass of noise. And the noise doesn't stop. The noise never stops. It can't stop, because if it stopped, it would mean haunting production and industry and jobs and dinosaurs with suits and guns and trophy wives need to keep the machine of the bloody titan running. For God's sakes, keep it running. For the love of God, keep it running. For the love of God! I never expected things to go so wrong. For gradually things to change for the worse. I don't consider myself to be a pessimist, and although I do understand and mostly agree, I don't consider myself to be a nihilist either, in the fact that I find a lot of purpose in just what I do and by existing, and it doesn't need to be doctrined by some greater power or held on by fallacy and tape. But what is it that you want?
What is it that we can get? Not just something that you can use to squeeze out another dollar. Not a beating, pounding organism, but something different. Something true, something beautiful. We experience these things deeply. Become stale and filled with dust motes. As a child, you're born into this world, with every sense and direction rushing at you. No prior memory to work off of, no memory of sense and touch. We experience these things deeply, but we are not conscious of them. By the time they've become things we consider and examine, we're off doing 100 other tasks, and learning 10 new things every hour. We take knowledge and weave it into experience and passion and love. We are complex creatures formed out of love, sadness, loneliness, bravery, excitement. Liminality is autistic horror. The infinite sprawl of capital. Our inability to comprehend of its totality, and a fugue or escape into the space in between space. Light covers and slopes the side of walls, red bricks dirty and weather-worn, wood floors varnished and waxed, smooth to a perfect shine. I trace my hand against the sides of wherever I woke up, staring at the fluorescent lights, initially overtaken by the brightness, but then gripped at by the light's temperature. Color is a sickly yellow, and its omnidirectional overhang fills me with a certain sickness I can't fully put away. An overstimulation and an eyesore. It looked like department store lighting, splayed every which way and where, the light seemingly everywhere equally. The floors of the carpet stiff and unpleasant to the touch. The feeling of it as I tried to examine it was a durable material, however neglected and left to become stale and filled with dust motes. I hear the hum around me. I don't remember how long I've been here. If I was here before. I look at the wallpaper around me. Initially, I found it to be unparsable, an indescribable mess of noise and decay within my fingers. But the longer I spent here, the more time I grew to feel familiar with the patterns, walking around every left wall and holding my hand against it as I walked. I noticed repetitions. The tall, thin vertical strips with a lace trim on top of each faded, flowery tower. The space around me feels musty. It feels vast. And it wasn't just for the virtue of me continuing to walk further and further along. I'd always been what I'd considered very autistic about light, heavily influenced from spatial light artists like James Turrell, to see the interplay of how each light spread out and clung to every inch of the empty rooms, made me feel so naked. A nudity brought on by no distraction, no desk to fiddle with, no chairs to sit on either, just walls, moving further and further back. I have no reason to be afraid or to feel as naked as I do, but something in my little mammalian brain screams at me that I'm not safe, that this architecture...
Do you ever think it's weird that we can't post links in YouTube comments? It's usually seen as bad form or scamming. Usually, YouTube makes a note to not let that happen. Whether it's moderation, automatic, or otherwise, nobody posts links to YouTube comments. They post links to forums, but when we talk about the audience participation, we're normally talking about a watching, captivated participation. And most of the comments usually go to the degree of compliments, declarations of positive feelings, different things you take away, negative or otherwise, but you don't contribute. There's not a platform to really talk about when it comes to YouTube comments.
It's too much space. So I keep walking. More and more and more. Initially, I was eager. No, well, petrified to explore further. Hours had passed and the lights never dimmed, nothing ever changed. The room stayed just as perpetually still as it had been. The same hum. So as sentimental as I'd grown for the place I had woken up, I needed to move by sole virtue of boredom and finding a less overstimulating room, as paradoxically understimulating as it was. More hours passed. It was hard to count the time with no clocks or sun to judge, but I could at least get a fuzzy estimate from my body's need for sleep and my own previously established chronology. I don't really think about the feelings I have about that, though. I could have a full-blown breakdown about this place. I just might yet. But a part of me is so scared to unravel the greater fear left unacknowledged. I keep walking, and as far as I can track from scratch marks I make as I walk and pieces of wallpaper I can tear, I've walked at least 90 miles so far. For a sign of something new, something distinctly new, but it's a McDonald's kiosk, or one of those built-in McDonald's that was carved into buildings and supermarkets, like a symbiotic parasite to a Walmart. The golden arches were the first giveaway. The different spatial language was like cold water to my parched mind. The walls were adorned with an early 2000s energetic mural of pop rocky zigzags, red backgrounds with complementary accents, muted color corrections of a child on a skateboard drinking a soda out of one of those plastic paperish cups, the design immensely nostalgic. I remember drinking one of those full of orange soda and ice, immensely refreshed and captivated and rewarding, even the ice tasted good with it. Along with the skate child, pictured of certain menu selections and shared mural space, a Big Mac, the most noticeable, taking center stage on one of the walls. The longer I scried and observed over every detail, the better I felt. It was so cathartic to obsess over every inch and centimeter of the McAlcove. The floors were a vibrant tiled gray and darker gray. Small squares that had a lower spacing that would be perfect for sticky soda to spill and get stuck in, or for crumbs of chicken nuggets to flake in between. I must have spent at least 5 weeks in that McDonald's. At a certain point, I elected to dismantle and disable the lights inside, which was extremely nourishing. The following weeks were the best I'd slept. I'd get dreams of Utah and the sun setting as the river passed through under the street above. I remember seeing many people on the other side, either fornicating or enjoying the shade of that space. Enjoying the shade that the space provided. Pink flamingo inflatable ring, the warmth in the air. Waking up every morning was a frustrating reminder of my strange infinity. I refused to admit to anyone of fear or suffering or agony of this infinity. So I stayed. A long time. Longer than I could even count. The murals quickly became replaced with animal figures engaged in sexual acts, drawings of political events, JFK's assassination, Princess Diana, my shitty attempt at drawing Roosevelt. I kept trying to redo it, but the face was too wrinkled. Time kept passing on, I think. Our inability. I never got hungry, but every now and then, what I would describe as a biblical event if others were around, I'd urinate, I think. Hell, the day I felt my bowels move, that shit literally made my day. Gross in any other situation. Horrendous even. But after a while, I started to question if there was even bacterial life here. After a few unmentionable tests, I don't think there is. So however long passes, enough where I look at myself in what would otherwise be the bathroom of this McDonald's, I notice certain small things. I don't noticeably age, or at least not in any way that's immediately apparent to me. The clothes I've been wearing, one of the last things that was tangentially connected to where I was before. My panties, my jeans, my t-shirt, all faded. Like when you're washing clothes after a while and the cool design you like start to flake and peel off without any peeling, or dye that gradually washes off the fibers without any significant activity on my part. My jeans were wrinkled as shit, but at least they were still comfortable. My panties were basically the same colors as the walls outside my home. That's how I feel. After so long, I feel like in a strange sense, this aberration of land became a reflection of me. The seats torn out to make a bed, every inch of the wall overwritten with my art, my mind. The once lit restaurant body, now the place where I reflected so often. The darkness was better than any weighted blanket I could ever buy, compared to the yellow monstrosity out there. Sure, it crept in. The corner is so hungry and wanting to come in. But I tried everything I could to calcify the windows and block out as much goddamn bile climb the ceilings. After a certain while, I thought I heard something, which would certainly be enough to scare me alone, except it sounded like footsteps. Not fast, not lumbering, but the same rhythm I made when I first found this place. For a significant moment, I was grappled in sheer screaming fear for what was outside. The carpet was a place that only made noise for me. The fibers would announce my prance. They weren't supposed to when I wasn't here. Inside here. But still I sit, thinking. Enough time passed where the noise had gone, but in the place of the first panic set in, a new one as its offspring. Who or what was that? I wasn't afraid of my safety anymore. An hour passed and I was so seethingly panicked about me missing another soul out here. It was impossible. It had to be. I had to be literally going insane to have heard it and just notice it. I had to be literally going insane to have heard it and notice it as I did with those soft footsteps. Did I miss the so-called bustle of my companionship? Did I fucking fuck myself? I didn't care anymore. I gave a fervent blessing to every corner of this McMe, and I set off in the direction I heard those steps. Stepping out of my ramshackle house and into the yellow again would have been agonizing if not for the nagging hope married to the uncommitted cold feet. A girl would have to say, "I do," to a man you felt paralyzed around. The fear of being left alone pierced my every muscle as I kept a consistent walk along the rightmost wall, the same where my fortress rests. I kept walking, and after a while the fear and hope in equal measure started to sedate to a numb hum, the same frequency as the lights above me. Why was this godforsaken space so big? After a certain point, it almost makes you want to gore yourself just to take up a little more space than it takes of you. But still I walked, steady pace and mindful of not exhausting myself or my sanity. I got pretty good at recognizing the patterns in this infinity, too, after a while. As random as it seemed, there was a measurable repetition, a rule-set philosophy that an overpaid franchise designer would be going in about making something like this. As random as it seemed, there was a measurable repetition, a rule set of philosophy that an overpaid franchise designer would in going about making something like this. "Oh, we'll put the food court right here. This is where IT goes. This is the open concept meeting room where everyone will have their chairs. And don't forget the cubicles." Fuck that guy. Fuck whoever thought that putting a pillar in that curved and met with another walled pillar was a copacetic way to induce a profit margin. The room was steeped in the 80s? Or 90s? It had the no-nonsense fetishism of business that was filled with the promise of enterprise and sustainable growth. I wish I could take that guy and tie him to a wheel, a hamster wheel. And that wheel would be connected to VR with me. And that wheel would be connected to VR with feed of me fucking his wife and giving his favorite dog to his neighbor Steve. He'd hate Steve for all the times he'd find mail. Nice mail addressed to him. Designer stuff. Stuff that you'd need an upper tax bracket for. It would make him wonder why it kept getting delivered to his house. And he'd call at least 12 people. One of which would be Steve, in a cordial pleading, tinged and buried with unbridled resentment. I'd take Steve and make out with him and spend all the time comparing him to this asshat designer who couldn't design a good living environment if he had $19 trillion and he never needed Viagra. But eventually I reached an end of sorts. I really stopped counting, but if I had to make another estimation of time, I'd say at least a few months have passed since I lived in McHeaven, McParadise, McMe. The familiar labyrinth became a little less familiar as a large opening converged through it, like one of those giant open-air walkways they have in shopping malls. I'd be excited for anything different, but by this point I'd been so numb and conscious that I wasn't entirely sure I wasn't sleepwalking and hallucinating all this. But still I stepped through. The cold air was the first thing I felt. It hit my face and then the rest of my body, and it felt near orgasmic. It woke me up for sure. The ceiling was much higher now. There was a lot less light. And none of it hung so close to my fucking face. Hello? Is anybody out there? Hello? Is anybody out there? Hello? Hello? Is anybody out there? Is anybody out there? Is anybody out there? Hello? 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 Is anybody out there? Hello? We're dependent on who the nearest people are, and who those people partially shape how we learn to react to situation. And a fugue, or escape into the space in between space. Light covers and slopes the side of walls, red bricks dirty and weather-worn, Wood floors varnished and waxed, smooth to a perfect shine. Do you put yourself in danger, or do you go out to make a friend? How do you see things, and how do they make you feel? 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 It's been overwhelming. It's been overwhelming me past the point where all detail and depth gets blurred and meshes with the paper it was printed on, and meshes with the polygons it was crafted on. So often in sensation and memory and constant
stale
continuing
and filled with
existence.
dust motes.
I look back feverishly to
I
all
hear
the
the
times
hum
I
around
panicked
me.
and dissociated.
I don't
It was
remember
a
how long I've
combination
been
of
here.
stress, plurality,
I was
and
here
paralyzing
before.
fear. The kind of fear that keeps
looked like
freezing as a
wallpaper
trauma
around me.
response,
Initially,
as a
I
way to
found it to be
prevent making the
unparsable.
wrong move.
An indescribable mess
That's
of
what
noise and
always
decay within
frustrated
my
me with
fingers.
math.
But the
No
longer I
tutor
spent
could help
here,
what was the job of a therapist. No therapist could help what was the job of a mother. No mother could help what was out of control. The past is a subject in which you both resent and endlessly cherish. You look back at the colors, at the fondness you have for the quiet times, and there is a shadow casted on it, deep in the corner, turned away, a shadow casted on the bad. There should be a study for family behavior, and it's wild that I've not heard of any professional field in the sense of behavioral science. Families do not operate in the office the way they do in the home. The reality in smaller hierarchy of parents and siblings. Cruelty is done upon another. Cycles are taught and class is taught. What did the people around you used to say about the strangers living outside of your house? The reality, your neighbors, your teachers, your local celebrities. The reality, what did your neighborhood look and sound like? Sensory information in an autistic life means a different perceptual interaction with the one's environment. For the longest time, I was struggling to figure out what this essay was about. Am I talking about the societal treatment of the aesthetic of it? The zeitgeist of how it affected and then subsequently brought about a new genre of horror and unreality? The conversation of isolation and the disconnectedness that we have been a part of from the phenomena that was the 2020s. The economic factors of late-stage capitalism that came to a head with the 2008 financial and housing crisis. In a way, I wanted to cover all of these topics, intent on encapsulating the entire field and subject comprehensively. And yeah, I could do that, but I've been working on this essay for about as long as I've been working on my fucking video game. Both have taken upwards of a decade. What I want to talk about is children's museums. I had been researching a lot of their architecture and philosophy. In my first stage of adolescence, I vividly remember walking through these weird amalgams of space, simultaneously a playground, a grocery store, a news station, a gas station, a Burger King, and yet none of these things. A strange simulacrum of sensoric euphoria. A strange simulacrum of sensoric euphoria where my puppy... A strange simulacrum of sensoric euphoria where my young puppy brain and all its autism happily commingled in a dance of space and touch and smell and sight. The strange plastic of produce and fake checkout counters. The faded printed logos of corporations and the roles therein to engage with. To me, then, it was one of the best places I'd ever been. Unlike most children's museums, where most lean into an educational aspect, or a more high-budget appeal, like larger ones. This place was a place of experience in simultaneous youth and adulthood, contextual but divorced from reality, a job without a boss, or employees, just children meekly running around, looking and touching at stuff. Less regimented, rote tasks and unrestricted exploration, for as long as my attention span at the time could hold. I find this place a significant one when talking about liminality. The Backrooms to me feels like an adult simulacrum of our world, just without all the concealing facade of bustle and data and noise to obfuscate the spaces we inhabit and pass through. I want to posit something that very few have been capable of voicing on the YouTube community, too fixated on the surface level text, literalism, and not enough on the darkness that lies inside, the greater truth. Through these artificial walls we construct of raw material, fiberglass, wood, stucco, concrete, and cotton. We've had a fixation on architecture and structure since the dawn of time. The difference here, however, is something I find much more substantial. I believe we are in a virtual world of our own creation, and as much as I'd like to cloak the thesis with poetry and flowery analogy, I still might. Our world we live in has become recognizably patterned, and urban environments and interiors. Our brains conditioned to recognize green grass, brown grainy dirt, deep blue skies, deep red blood, an instinct to avoid predators, to seek out fresh food. All these evolutionary instincts and behaviors, a navigational tool along with sensory information. Is this sharp? Is this soft? To keep the surviving person safe enough to live. But throughout the 19th century, and with more and more structural power granted to corporate bodies, and a world more intent on advertising, without further examination of it, it seems we'd be living in a post-scarcity world. Our needs, on the surface, met, and our economy based on the demands of a free market. A supply and demand-based architecture where the needs in the market are filled with eagerly accommodating supply. You need fruit? Good news, there's a huge fruit industry. Just head to the nearest supermarket and acquire. Variety is dictated and met surely, and then you're eagerly graced with whatever product you needed. Everything works as advertised. The box tells you the contents, and you're informed and enabled by your right and ability to purchase. Where does a world go from there? Well, the question is, what if the consumer didn't decide how the market worked? What if the companies in various legislative eras and administration passed through the office of the United States? Through decades and decades and decades, our brands have deregulated, disrupted, and overall meddled in our way of life. There are many intersectional reasons for how things have come to be. To briefly list segregation, redlining, gentrification, zoning, and class, our worlds have been built with our interaction in mind, but not for our benefit or ease of use, especially with the popularization of the automobile. A world where the streets and neighborhoods are dominated by several hundred pounds of steel and gauche hyper-individualism, where the social crime of jaywalking became socially implanted and brought into the rule of law. The car is as much a tool of dominance and ultimate authority, veins of congestion and pollution insisted on, like bloodstreams and vessels. Overhead, we can look and see the impact our roads have contextualized with everything else. Highways built for cars and cruise control and consistent compromised traffic. But what happens when cities get built for cars to navigate through and not for the pedestrians that live within them? Then compounded with those problems, a world where a city's growth is determined by business leads to commercial districts, large-scaling parking lots sweeping what otherwise might be fields and groves and pastures and community planning. We are living in the resultant apotheosis of capitalism. It's clear to anyone who has eyes, but all of this has been preambled to what I'm about to tell you next.
The same tiles, the same walls, the same face with the skeleton of a stranger of a man who's never met you before but wants your money. A cracker of a man, a cracked popcorn man, bones jutting out like towers, bones like polished marble. Almost looks like nothing's punctured, but rather an ornate design. An ornate man from an ornate land, bourgeois noise. Temptress says the waves crash against the schoolhouse in my dream, the desert where the genderless god waits for me. The demons look in their support circle and look down at their watches, checking the small minute hand as I arrive late. The broken system built up a broken system, 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 built up a broken system. A girl so innocent, so new and brought into a torrent of misinformation, causing her to doubt anything she'd known, anything she'd ever known, being told that her being there was an inconvenience of cosmic proportions, being told that her life was plastic keyboards and cheap smudge screens to swipe, and ramblings to ramble on, and watching to watch, the devil you built and the devil I am, being told that her life was plastic keyboards and cheap smudge screens to swipe, towers upon towers, and then the towers crash, and then we all wonder what happens at the towers, and then the towers go on to shape our reality, and then those realities build more towers, and those towers get destroyed once again.
Foolish child of hubris and ignorance, all the same. You see the same world, the same infinite visceralities, all surrounding you, all encompassing you.
And you as a contrarian ought to do is one to call out the hypocrisy, to call out the simplicity, to call out the flattening. But yet, in the same vein, you yourself are victim to the same cruel fate of hypocrisy. You yourself to call out any injustice, any incongruencies, any differences, any notion of creating something, of paring and tearing off sinew, bone, and mattered flesh as drops, simple droplets of Israel. Who am I to be yours? Who are you to be mine? It's all the same, we're all the same. In a large table, tapestry, table, and I am one half. Who are you? Who are you, child? Who are you?
Say that a beast cannot be a beast. Who are you to say that a simplistic cannot be a simplistic?
Who are you to say that you know, that you can empirically claim, to proclaim? And so what are you to do? What are we all to do? And I will tell you. I will tell you the truth. Simplistic as it all ever was. The world you know. The world you know is still around. But the world you know is dead. Long live the old world. Such as a zombie may walk, being given directions by their master, being resurrected to fill a purpose, to fulfill a pact, a slavery built off of something shambling, built off something that just needs rest, that just wants rest. A voodoo. But are you capable? Are you capable of such? And who are you in this discretion, in this disagreement? Are you the doctor? Or are you the shambling mass? Confused and terrified and looking out for any way to escape. But all the while, you're still on the same track, following the same tasks.
realize now what I've done. I realize after so much chasing after this unworded feeling, a phenomena that haunts me like a ghost that's right behind me at all times. An itching in the back of my throat of a truth that no one else can seem to see. A hauntology of temporal space and time, from the presented idea of the end of history intertwined with neoliberalism, and the anger I felt for so long. It felt like a friend being misgendered in front of me. It felt like a distant relative being patronized. I had the tongue and yet I held it. I had the tongue. And yet I held it. What justice would it serve to do anything but to act and protect and defend what I knew in my guts to be so viscerally real and certain? The fake amongst the real and the real within it, the real amongst the fake. A circular recursion, an aggregation of patterns just like the tags that run the sacred algorithm you use. And I see it now. I see now what I hadn't before. Interpretation is a form of violence, a needle piercing the flesh of lips, and I see the beautiful, delicious trickling of blood as interpretation collapses under the unobserved into an observable. It's a match of throwing weight at each other, a punch-drunk romance from one to another. It's also what I've realized, as much as I've despised the collapsing of it. The communal creation of levels is a conceptual navigable researched. It's a tread ground, desire paths on grass that over time grant the viewer to see where everyone else has already been. It strips the observers afterwards, leaving them of any magic of their own. What is the untamed expanse after it became tamed? The wilderness, when the hunters and explorers and colonialists who conquered and pillaged and broke the deals of indigenous nations take and crush into the certain, the known and the categorizable, the brutish brushing of your insistence, when that insistence is just a singular perspective in a sea of thousands of others. Do you see yourself as a greater speakeasy among the rabble? Indeed, by continuing to build on Bachelord, Slocum treats the snail in Abbottson Stream as a remarkable inversion of the house's spiral staircase. Robinette believed that it was by rolling over and over that the snail built its staircase. Thus, the snail's entire house would be a stairwell. It contorts itself in order to advance and grow, the poetics of space. Now, except for when Abbottson speaks, silence predominates. I have fought this bloody battle with my brain not ceasing its fight to capital. Our generational ADHD among all ages and genders and ethnicities. But what good is a signifier? Ageism, bigotry, prejudice. What good is it to take a person and collapse them into a collection of attributes and traits and tags when they transcend all categorization? The same is to be said of houses, you know. You can take it any which way you'd like. Bechtel had it with the haunting of family. Familiarity unfamiliar, to be amongst a maze of her father's own design and her father's own trapping. To be a minotaur unrecognized by Daedalus and given walls to trace her palms against. What must her walls have felt like? I think of the houses I grew up in, each haunting me so deliciously. In erotic vigor, I find such delight in the haunting. In Amarillo, I remember the stumbling I had in my dreams every time I would re-enter into the house, which I was told had been lived by a dear lesbian couple shortly thereafter on moving, which I'd never met or seen. In my sentimental pursuits, I hope in serendipity I do get to meet them. For them to have shared in the same shelter I did, the one that raised me and gave me the support I did. A house can be a parent. but within its walls I learned to entertain myself as its child. A metal blue metallic mesh DVD container, silvery and reflective, a zipper in between with rows of teeth to zip and unzip, allowing me to make purchase of my array of GameCube discs I had searched for many, many times before. I'd coveted the return of my games, my worlds within worlds I had traveled within. In my dreams I had seen it, or at least felt its essence, but I never could find it. Each time the walls were the same, the skeleton of a familiar friend, but the guts were shifting, ever shifting. Sometimes the house was bare with its furniture strewn about every which way. Sometimes it was just as I remembered, as was already mentioned in Chapter 3. Sometimes it was just as I remembered. As was already mentioned in Chapter 3, some critics believe that the house's mutations reflect the psychology of anyone who enters it. Dr. Hogland asserts that the extraordinary absence of sensory information forces the individual to manufacture his or her own data. Ruby Dahl, in her stupendous study of space, calls the house on Ash Tree Lane a solipsistic heightener, arguing the house, the halls, and the rooms all become the self-collapsing, expanding, tilting, closing, but always in perfect relation to the mental state of the individual. What is this post-modernity that we so uncomfortably reside against? A video lives immortal for as long as server-side withstand, but you stand to be stepping on one foot in the past and another into the future. Hey, it's Bomber Guy. Do you tap dance in words and poetry like Lovecraftian coming-outs? Does a pyramid girl selling simulacrum of a non-existence of a gender, of a farcity, of a heinous crime, of stealing interpretations and presenting them as her own? Is that not also art? There's something to be said about the harm of misrepresenting an argument and ultimately harming it, misconstruing it, which in many cases I fear I've already crunched those leaves dreadfully. But of course, what is remaining after all the dust settles and the virtual bullets of slander and power shift and accrue? I do not speak and invoke your name for swagger nor accolades, but I oft think on the act of sourcing and recitation. I think of how often I find myself bitter in imagining, writing a dry academic reference. Of course I'd like to sit around and chat. Of course I'd like to stay and chew the fat. Of course I'd like to sit around and chat. But I find myself lacking where so many others triumph in references, the ability to afford academic papers. I can't imagine how much money you've put down breaking through the walled gardens of knowledge. But then again, I digress. Is someone listening in? Is something listening in? To the untrained eye, a plagiarism is a crime. Rambling is a scribbling graphomaniac. A rambling is a schizophrenic madness. Zampano knew it well, and everyone considered him a madman in a dark and empty box. You might consider him a fictional, pitiable vehicle. You might consider him a rhetoric, a container for mere symbology, but within the darkness is he not an immortal being, breathing a harkened, raspy breath as he struggles to get it all down? You're all mad. Everyone who wishes to be an essayist is pursuing an exercise in madness to varying extents. I see that madness in myself more and more, but that's quite all right by me. If it means I understand more, and it transmutes the rugged polymer of confusion into a blessed, warm gold of understanding, for whatever that's worth. But this understanding goes beyond mere interpretation or value. An interpretation cannot warm you at night. When the video essayist stops speaking, stops editing, and the video ends, the video you're left in the darkness of by yourself, you're left in the black mirror of the monitor, of the screen, of your thoughts, which you run. You run in circles like you're all the way from Troy, a descendant chased by the Minotaur. You're perpetually running away to the darling mother noise. You know what I mean. Different types of love. Different types of love. How possible? How possible? It's as much of a soma as it is a ritualistic bubbling of unconscious mechanisms. Some may call it shamanistic. For my thesis to really be considered truly in its entirety, you must be willing to make your own, individual unique perceptions unshared by anyone else, and to walk into the popcorn wall, to walk amongst the thousands of discarded things from people before you. I live in 2 places in my grandparents' household. Lived in 2014, where the walls are the strange, fiery, fuzzy carpet of yellows and reds, vibrant like autumn. The kitchen and many different sections of the house have bright and vivid patterns, much lower and less thick than the previous primary carpeting and fuzz. I can now close my eyes and intentionally walk around it to where my continuity harmonizes in the past. And now where it stands a modernist magazine cover. The fireplace now filled with bookshelves to indicate the idea of a fire. Hopefully not one of Fahrenheit 451, but of a vague gestural knowledge. Perhaps the decision was to imply, whether subconsciously or intentionally, that literature became a foundational support structure of the new building. The skeleton, the same, but the guts brand new, the walls shifting in my mind due to how vastly different it looked. It haunts me now. To stumble around in the dark, one must be able to move freely without fear of falling, or stumbling, or moving in a direction which may cause them to careen to the ground. That is also to say, to be unafraid of what lies inside your own personal darkness. To conquer and follow deeper against every other evolutionary survival instinct, screaming at you to belay those actions. I remember the jujubes. The way the bright lime green flesh would fight against the summer sun. The hottest heat had cicadas buzzing in the Lubbock summers. The disquieting maturation as they unceremoniously and unwitnessed fell to the craggy stone that filled the inner circle of the circumference of the wide spinning driveway. What is it to be a fruit if you aren't ever eaten? To be nourished upon and met with teeth and acid, to be eaten and considered and tasted? Does your growing, greening, and ripening only exist as a singular matter of physics pushing forward upon others, upon other forces? From the Guggenheim website. In 1966, Terrell moved into a building formerly known as the Ocean Park, California, where he embarked on a groundbreaking work exploring the ways light can manipulate the perception of groupings, grouping them into broad categories based on similarities in perceptual effects. In Aphrium 1, White, 1967, one of the earliest of what Terrell calls cross-corner projections. Visitors encounter a glowing cube floating in the corner of a room. What first appears to be a solid object resolves upon closer inspection into simple planes of light. The single-wall projection, Prado White, on the other hand, seems to dematerialize space, dissolving the wall and creating passaggio into unknown space beyond. Passage into the shallow space construction. Ronin, 1968, reverses the effect, emanating light so a vertical architecture fissure appears as a solid plane and dematerializes the darkened wall. Words often fail me, and in turn I fail words, I suppose. But not in the way I consider myself a failure as a child, the way I'd perform knowledge, the way I'd perform my own psychic beatings at the computer, unable to render computer code due to my inability to focus and obtain the transcribed and orally prompted knowledge. I'd given myself many mental scars last this day that last still onwards. I cover them in a blanket in the dark. The perfect accumulation doesn't exist, as much as I'd will it so. Perhaps the perfect essay is one that is in existence. By perfect, I mean the concept of being bloody, like a babe, breathing in virtue of having survived conception. This essay was once on Undertale's negative space, the way my younger self navigated the world of Snowden and met with each of the colorful inhabitants of the underground. But then there was a violence. A violence in wanting to see more, wanting to perceive and be perceived, to kill and, well... My gums bloody as I imagine the people I loved in this world of Game Maker's script being murdered like dogs in the street. And yet everyone around me treat them as mere code, as objects with sprite that you can set to static by just not having their step event animate them. 0. I imagine all the crevices unseen, every distant forest, everything blocked off by the collision blocks, by the objects, by the limitations, conscious or unconscious, by the unwritten, the cabin far, far away, not Toriel's, but someone else's. I never speculated on strangers' property. That'd be inappropriate, rude. But you lot seem keen to derive papyrus, scribbling your notes as you take my friend and superflat him just as Murakami suggested. You reduce him to what had been written by Toby. You treat him as an autistic punchline. You're no better than Flowey. So hungry for more and always a maw of thorns to dig into bones until it becomes powder. Powder between your fingers. But where you kept pushing, killing to collapse more and more of the unobserved, Sans, a guardian of his home, he being the only sap, the only tragic fool or hero, so sad in his misery to see what monsters you really are, with your floating soul so desperate to sing in harmony that you flood into comments and push people into caricatures, an entertaining hypernormality from the Germas to the Cassios, and you keep doing it whilst Toby work in a basement, Hussey having moved out and joined the circus, understanding and creating the trifecta, the infinite, the unseen, the innumerable. Toby has ever been patiently working, and you hungry mouths can't wait to speculate and spread your vines and interpret. But what do you do? What are you going to do with Deltoon? If he's as singing of a soul as I parasocially theorize, you'll be wrong. Dead wrong. But he's not the only would-be victim. You all did the same to Gooseworks and the runaway vehicle that was Digital Circus through interpretation, and not just, but a vicious and hypersaturation of what was and disregarding and never creating in what isn't. It's the programmer's paradox, a negative division to prevent and unwrite a future. Mark Fisher's ghost still roams the hallways. My heart hangs heavy fit for his visage, pale and floating and uncertain of an escape out of this maze. But I've seen it, beautiful like a person in a crowd, deep in a crowd that sticks out to you as she makes direct eye contact across. But therein lies the use of secret and encryption and metaphor, and ARG was my temptress in tapping syncopation, like a young musician learning from a metronome, to learn the tools of the trade. Loose lips, sink ships, and closed eyes keep trade secrets. Some secrets are meant to be killed, especially if it's cold cereal nights to serve the state and capital. But then again, how do you differentiate? How do you differentiate when your vision and space tells you they're identical twins? Only the dark and negative space in between can tell you what you really are, what they really are, in relation, in context to Galleon. But there I go again with my violence. There I go again with your waning attention span. But perhaps I'm being cruel needlessly. Perhaps I've been embittered by my peers, to the Roe Ramdens of the world, to my shallow conception of what an audience is to be. If it's boring you, change the channel, and you prime yourself to avoid boring, and you prime yourself to, while claiming you're valuing your time a commodity. What if I told you that the rules you made up weren't rules you made up? Well, you'd ask me who did it. And I wouldn't have an answer, would I? Was John Money the conceiver of gender? Ridiculous. A singular person couldn't be in charge of something so pivotally significant to her common lexicon. But then those are the snuffers. There are those snuffers. The cruel ambiguators, not for art, not for moving forward, but stepping back to regain a monstrous draconic, to shackle you to what has been conceived and to deny you of any new translations or interpretations. There's something to be said of even denying you the option of violence as the ultimate cruelty, authoritarian and ignorant, shambling and deaf to any well-meaning dissertations, correction, or nuance. Those who'd kill red, yellow, and blue, any Rothko with a box cutter, denying anyone a chance at interpreting in its original form ever again, one who'd classify art as a degenerate, or one they'd deem as righteous. You'd think, if you'd think, the Minotaur was scary. Just wait until you've met his ornery ilk. Or is it his? Poison stochastic pursuant. If we were to place them in any analogy or formulation, they'd be a constructor of wooden horses, Trojan, simulacrum of stallion and humility, with a violent pulp hiding within between its oaken guts, leaving nothing else behind but an unmarkable white. An unremarkable white. Page 309. Screen. Page 311. Alarga en la pradera una pasada sombra, pero ya el hecho de nombrarlo y de conjecturar su circunstancia lo hace difícil del arte y no criatura viviente de las que andan por la tierra. I could point you to a wall rack of all the components of a sword. To a wall rack of all the components of a sword. But when you put it all together, would you have the gusto to wield it? Through hermeneutics to hauntology to links within links without interlinks, through links within hyperlinks, I could point you to documentaries and videos, to line breaks and stammerings, through gleaning the virtuous truth through a patchwork of disparate pieces to recover the truth made entirely out of fiction. But would you wear it? Does anyone want to wear this? How hungry are you? Do you consider me a madwoman to have constructed this? I started this in 2017, and now it's 2024, and I'm 22, and I dream in the outside of walls where you can't see anything. I bless the things you call limited. You call it liminal, I call it elegiac. Then I retract my statements, thinking furthermore, and educate myself further for your enjoyment, only to endure more truth, blinding white. A white that you can blind, and that can blind you as much as it can teach you. A white that can kill you as much as it empowers you. Floating point signifiers and simulacrum. My sinew dances, it's sexual like candy. And then Anoni sings of my exploit, while I piss myself silly. The Johnstons singing evermore. Nuclear simulacrum stimulation brought broth brimley through nonsense, until the pan is shaken during the gold rush, and the nuggets get found. But what good is gold in a gold rush? What use is a coin in a bubble currency? if not to be the first one to push the others aside and proclaim, "I found it! I found the nugget of a wisdom that will set me for life!" And then it doesn't. Any hope you had to be put up is diminished, as the coin you had put everything on is a cent, and that gold pyrite that you spent tireless, placed by those charging you admission, and then you realize you're on set. Action. I glance at the passing buildings as a child, feeling so strange, like every unvisited house and restaurant and establishment was a set designed for my passage, for me to go in betwixt and never to enter. For me to enter, it would collapse it once more into the observable. I think it's just about time I close the book.
The things happening.
I think it's about time I close the book, or at least this edition, and hand it to my future self, to you, and, well,
Just
to
what I
sate the
do
hunger of
and
my
by
past selves,
existing,
because
and
of
it doesn't.
their efforts. I refuse to let them go in vain. My bones conceptualized and imagined as white ivory, surrounded by squish and meat and flesh and tendons and darkness, old darkness. I hope after everything,
Even the
this
ice
means
tasted
you
good with
create
it.
something even bigger and more expansive. To echo, echoes echo. To post the post, post the post, the postmodern. Not to insincerely profit off of a fad or a gold rush, but to make art for its sake, unmonetized or otherwise. To be subtle but poignant, to be bold and unafraid of literally anything. To be able to say what the fuck is on your mind and mean it without the thousands of caveats. No more should you have to back up an opinion with a coward's foreword. You are alive, goddammit. Act like it. Stars to live by, stars to steer by, stars to die by. May 26th, 1991. I dream of vampires. I dream of God. I dream of no vampires. I dream of no God. I dream of nothing, and yet that too is still my dream. Is it possible to love something so much you imagine it wants to destroy you only because it has denied you? Then, are we inhabited by history? Nothing to share with. God grant me distraction.
like a thing where I'm sending like a phone call to the future, and so they're gonna log this, and then like, I don't know, I hope we still have these answering machines, because I love mine, and I try to keep my tape from filling up, and so, I don't know. I just wanted to say, to future me, if you're listening, do we have any cool cats? I've been drawing a lot, which has been really cool, and I painted a cool picture of the house, and I like it a lot, and I hope you have a cool house, and I love you, you're really pretty, and I know we're gonna be awesome, so don't give up. Okay. I think I hear Mom and Dad calling, so I'm gonna go, but I love you so much, and I hope you get this. Okay. Bye-bye.
Think about your personal well-being. So, even though there are good benefits to having HR departments now, I bring up these points to highlight the bigger picture as to why HR is not really our friends. And my argument is that because workplaces have become so complex, employers need HR departments to create a workplace culture where they feel the employee is not going to get burned out.
It feels like it rounds down to nothing. The legendary Spanish artist Francisco Goya once wrote, "Nature confounds and amazes those who know most. What statue or cast of it might there be that is not copied from divine nature? As excellent as the artist may be who copied it, can he not but proclaim that when placed at its side, one is the work of God and the other of our own miserable hands?"
But a collection of values and meanings. We are always, in Peterson's language, telling ourselves a story. And if you're very clever, you'll already have spotted, oh, that's why he does all the self-help stuff. Peterson's always talking about being mindful of what you pay attention to, what story are you telling yourself, and phenomenology is a great base on which to build that, because in theory, if you change the story you tell yourself, change the meanings you see in the world, then you can change the world. And you at home, keep your eyes on the couch, okay? Now then, what did you just experience? Did you at any point see the entire couch? No, you didn't. You can only ever see one side of it at a time. And yet, in your mind's eye, you weren't going, there is one side of a couch, there is another side of a couch. In your mind's eye, you experience it as one complete thing.
Isn't really anything without someone interpreting it. One might even argue that's what makes it art and not simply craft. What is the difference between the objective standard and the Borg paradigm? Mahler, perhaps, would say that his standard is based on decades of academic study surrounding the craft of storytelling and filmmaking. Debatable, but alright. Makes sense. Like, I'm pretty sure that the surface-level darkness and confusion isn't lost on these analysts. What I believe has happened is that they took the feeling of dread that was elicited in them and invented a story that properly matched it. They then...
of ethics. See, I like to treat stories like science projects. Sometimes I wonder if this process doesn't enliven the text at hand so much as kill it, the way dissection kills a frog. In a series of essays, philosopher Paul Ricoeur speaks on symbols, how they start as limitless potential, and the moment an observer assigns them a specific meaning, they enter a more restrictive space, like a cage, the absence of the sign from the thing. is only the negative condition for the sign to reach the thing, touch it, and die in this contact. Like, let's take a sign. Say, water. If I were to claim this water symbolizes self-reflection and memory, the sign would then cease to be a sign. By appointing it a specific meaning, I would have relegated the sign to the realm of self-reflection and memory. I've effectively chiseled down this nebulous entity of raw, unfettered potential into a specific channel of interpretation, shaped by my personal whims and worldview. This thing I love to do, where I analyze a text almost to the point of unraveling it like a cheap holiday sweater, can start to feel like an act of violence or oppression against the text.
Cracks and shifting floors can speak volumes about your foundation's health. Hi, I'm Bush, and we are Wilders Brothers. We've been your local foundation whisperer for over 50 years. Call us today for your free 27-point foundation analysis. We'll listen to what your home is saying and find the best solution for the stories it's telling. Where your home's whisperers are heard.
Astronomers determine what is and is not a planet. Anyone at the table who can put what it is to rest so we can speak freely about what it means to us? Well, no, but kind of. Look, tree. Chances are if I say the word tree, you know what I'm talking about. Say I want to tell you about a specific tree, like, say, the one in the front yard of the house I grew up in. What can I tell you about it? Well, I can tell you that it was big. As a kid, the span of my arms could only go about a quarter of the way around the trunk, and the county required us at least once to prune it because the branches were touching the power lines. I can tell you how the bark felt to touch. It had this kind of grooved pattern, almost like tire treads, but rougher, and it felt almost crumbly. Like if I ran my palm across it, I'd almost expect the bark to slough off in clods like dirt. I can tell you about the leaves, how they were a darker green than most of the other trees in the area, almost round but with a sharp point at the end. How they were smooth and waxy on the top, but the underside collected dust, which I'd compulsively wipe off with my thumb. What I can't do is take my experience of this tree and beam it telepathically into your brain, so I'm using language. I'm breaking down that experience into its constituent elements, colors, textures, images, sensations, translating those into words, and giving the words to you so you can translate them into your own set of sensations and try to reconstruct the thing that's in my head.
One nod from an expert in that piece of canvas would be worth maybe a couple of $100,000. And now, with your permission, a bit of verse.
The day that my mother took me to work, fuzzy and blurry in my mind, the same temperature as the early misty morning. I couldn't tell you exactly when. Some nights, some memories, some mornings blur into one another. The morning where I woke up early and I went to see my mom off. The morning where I came and went with my mom to her office place. She worked at AIG. First time I'd ever been in a cubicle space. First time she ever took me to work. It had been a long time coming, and although I'd wish she'd taken me again, I don't remember the second time if she had. But I do remember the architecture. I can visualize and picture the layouts, the ways the cubicles spaced out between each other, the temperature, the room felt nice, temperate, not too hot, not too cold, the right amount where it felt almost invisible, as if the temperature was the furthest thing away from your mind. I remember where the break room was, I remember the colors, I especially remember the details of her desk, the office, the pictures she hung. Everything to it spoke like a usual cubicle would. But in the incoming years ensuing onwards, AIG would get into a lot of different controversies, problems, and ultimately, after a certain point, it was no longer a factor of my life to really worry about. But it had been a major factor in 2008 and onwards. To how much I can't really disclose or discuss nor speculate. But I can say this. We take these symbols, symbologies, and we mold them
We shape them in this strange world. We try to polish them, get rid of any imperfection. We try to shape it into something that someone else can pick up, scrutinize, put down. It's speculative value, a currency that we could potentially use. It's speculative currency. How much money can you sell a memory? How much money can you place on an interpretation? How much value can you sell your own soul? The cubicle, the office space as a concept, it eludes me, for inside of its smiling exterior lay an apparatus so intentioned, so calculated, so manipulatable as it is pliable. So what is anything to be said, to be gleaned, to be extrapolated? That, my friend, is up to you. As you build this sword in the coming years, all the little noises, the imperfections, the things you try to hide in the background, to surface, to unsurface, to edit, to manipulate, to blur away, and still exists behind, unseen, buried underneath a wall, its muffled voice still ringing. You can still hear it, even if it's out of sight. And to what extent am I real to you? How much is my voice something tangible? How real am I compared to Zampano? A man who is blind but could see everything. And I can see, but I feel blinded by all. I find myself so dazzled in spectacle. And yet, they claim that spectacle is all there is. After you're done watching an advertisement, after you're done walking on a sidewalk, looking at different pictures and posters and bright flashing LEDs, symbols, semantics, symbologies representing lifestyle or accruing something, aspiring to something, how much of that is actually of any value? What do you get? Who are you if your foundations are not built on wood and steel and beams and nails and bolts, but instead our materials become cheaper, more replicatable, more mimicable, more accelerated? Terence McKenna talking about the acceleration of technology in time and space and development and evolution and research and theory. To consider all of it would be to engage in the same goal, the journey that I had. And in that instance, I believe that makes me another character in this fiction. For me to embark in this is for me to become as cartoonish of a caricature as Wells became in the Animaniacs. For anyone to become a appropriated, self-referential, hollowed out musk, a shell in which you step out of a rocket
to Lisa Simpson's adoration. But that's not her face. That's not her body. That's not her words. That's not her. You recognize her. You see her. You can understand and perceive the concept of Lisa Simpson. But you know in your heart of hearts that's not her, and you don't ask yourself why. You just play along. You all play along in this game. You get up and you go about your day as if nothing catastrophic has happened. When there's a man lying face down in the center of the floor, no one seems to acknowledge him or even check to see if he's alive. At some point or another, people place the mirror, or was it a mirror? Was it a canvas? But the light flitters and flutters. The chemical component of the film falters, and all you're left with is interpretation.